Hello and welcome to MixBus with me, Kevin Paul. This series aims to allow some of the best producers, mixers, engineers and other music industry people to discuss their careers and their approach to music. The success of this series depends on people hearing it, so don't forget to tell your friends if you like what you hear, and remember to give it a 5-star rating, and please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice to make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, special offers and promotions. This episode is brought to you in association with KMR, the UK's leading independent pro audio retailer, and recorded in association with Audient and the ID44. Find out more at kpmixbus.com and follow us on facebook.com/kpmixbus and at kpmixbus on Instagram and Twitter. My guest today is the legendary Gareth Jones. After initial training at the BBC in the late 70s, he started his journey at Pathway Studios in London and helped build the Garden Studio in Shoreditch. In the early 80s, he moved to Berlin for 10 years and worked at the legendary Hansa studio. His work goes all the way back to 1980 and includes artists such as Fad Gadget, Depeche Mode, Wire, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and Erasure. More recently, he's worked with Stubbleman, the Leisure Society, Spiritual Friendship and Yann Teirsen. It's fair to say that I could fill the entire podcast just mentioning the names of the artists he's worked with. Gareth is a pioneer in the use of digital equipment and combines this with analogue recording techniques and his love of synthesizers. Gareth, welcome to MixBus. Thanks for having me here. How are you?
Delighted to be a part of your podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a long time. Hasn't changed much, if I'm honest. Was it decorated with Jamie's work last time, or has it always been...
No, this is an artist called Ben. I love Jamie Reed's artwork, and I got kind of quite inspired by it when I moved here first in the 90s.
Yeah.
Because in the Studio One, in the Neve Room, it's like a Bedouin tent in there.
Yes.
Have you been in the Neve Room here?
Not recently,
it's super,
but a long time ago.
Gorgeous. It's like lined with silks. It looks like silks. I thought, oh, that's nice. I don't have to have a grey or a brown studio. I could have colours.
Yeah.
But I couldn't afford Jamie Reed, and I met a lovely guy called Ben, and I commissioned him to do these paintings that are on the wall.
Yeah, it's very nice, very cosy, very relaxed.
Trippy, man.
What drew you to the studio in the first place? Because you've dedicated yourself to recording. Your passion for recording is well known in the industry. Where did it all start?
It started at school, I suppose. I mean, I got my love of recording music from my dad. When I went into rock and roll, I felt I was being a bit of a rebel because my dad was a school teacher, and I should have been a doctor or a lawyer or something.
Right. Okay.
And but many years later, I thought, oh, the old man's hobby was like listening to his records, and he really loved it. He built a little speaker that went in like a bass reflex cabinet that went across the corner of the living room, and he mucked about with his hi-fi. He had an old Rogers Valve hi-fi. So anyway, not only did I owe, like many of us, I owe like loads to my parents, but I got a definite love of music and recorded music from the old man. So, and then somehow, when I was at school, I did all the usual things that you do at school, I suppose. Bunked off and yeah. Anyway, but I like my music lessons. I liked sound effects. I played around with tape recorders for school plays and shit. So I started editing and recording, and then I bought a beautiful. Sadly, I don't have it anymore. I bought a Ferrograph Series 4, like a tube. Based mono tape recorder from some money I made picking fruit in the summer. For some reason, I mean, I was only a kid. I don't know why I bought it, but I felt that I needed to have a tape recorder. And then I started recording my friends at school. I think the mic, was like total. I think it was a crystal mic, like a real dodgy mic.
Okay.
I don't think I was doing like the creative musical edits, but because I wasn't that on it. But I was doing, cutting a bit of music and then cutting it into a sound effect and then cutting it into a bit of speech.
Oh, okay.
And this was like super
some early sort of radio editing almost.
Kind of vibe, yeah. Like we made, and I made some things like like little radio dramas, I suppose they might be. I made a few
brilliant.
Weird little recordings with mates.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of my discovery of music and love of music and enjoyment of music has been through recording music. From being a student and listening to headphones through the night when I should have been asleep so I could get to lectures early in the morning.
Sure.
And, so making records is a response to that. I'm actually making stuff that's been very musically important to my journey. Some people come to music by playing in a band or loving gigs or in the classical world just giving great concerts. But my vibe is I've always loved it, like a couple of speakers or a set of headphones to go on musical journeys. So that kind of connects.
Yeah, and you've always, as long as I've known you, you've always pushed the envelope with your recording. I mean, you've told me many times about your time with Depeche Mode, for instance, where you were recording on balconies, recording drum sounds just from the street, or putting something in a bin and recording the sound of something going into the bin, and you've got a microphone there recording that, and then trying to do something with it on the other end. Is that just something that you just thought, I'm just going to have a go at that?
No, I didn't know what I was doing. That's why it seems like we were being adventurous,
right?
Because I didn't know how to do it properly. So, I'm kind of got a very basic training, as you mentioned, at the BBC,
right? Okay.
Which was hugely valuable at the time, but it was super basic. But I never had the pleasure of being an assistant in a great studio,
okay,
where you get the opportunity to work with masters of the art,
yes.
Both musical geniuses, men and women, and back in the 70s, mostly production and engineering geniuses, or mostly men back then. But I was kind of a bit thrown in the deep end at Pathway. Happily for me, a guy gave me a break. Mike Finesilver, who owned the studio, gave me a break. I was looking for a job in a studio.
Okay.
And he gave me a break. And then I was thrown into, do it myself. So a lot of learning by doing. And a lot of learning actually from musicians who said, I want to do this, or how about we try this, or something. So I was always, because I didn't know, I mean, there's some hugely creative friends and colleagues who came up as assistants as well, of course.
Yes.
But I kind of feel, because I didn't know what I was doing, I was happy to try anything.
And obviously, from trying anything, you were responsible for creating some incredibly influential records.
Some things worked. I mean, even on a big record, the experiments you try that fail are not suitable. They don't appear,
Sure.
Of course they don't. But actually, I don't think there's any failure involved in making art. The thing is to actually do it. And then, as you always learn, don't you?
You learn if it works, or you learn if you don't work.
And you learn that it doesn't work in this context, but it might work in another context.
Right.
That was one of the big discoveries I had, because when I was younger, I was a lot more ego-driven, so that if someone didn't like one of my ideas, I might be a bit offended, But as I grew up, I realised that just because the idea is not appropriate in this musical context, doesn't mean it could also be a genius idea. You put it on the shelf and you pull it down 5 years later and use it, offer it in a different musical context.
How do you deal with that as a producer when someone says they don't like something?
When I was younger, then I would. You say, how do you deal with it? When you sulk. Because they don't like your idea. You sulk. Yeah. What's the matter with him? But I think as you broaden your horizons, I mean, we know, don't we? Especially, there's a very clear aspect of this in mixing. A lot of my commission work now is mixing.
Sure.
What's important in mixing is that the client likes the mix. I've got a very broad palette. Like we all have. There's a million things we can do. There's a million ways of getting to a good mix, and everyone gets there in their own way.
Yes.
But the point is, it doesn't matter if I like the mix or not. Right. What matters is that the person I'm making the mix for, and it is a kind of a humble job in many ways, what matters is that they should be delighted. For instance, like now, when it's usually the artist is the main visionary in saying if the mix is there, the client, usually the artist, could be a very creative A&R person, but when the client says they're happy with the mix, then I stop. Whereas when I was younger, sometimes I'd be like, oh no, I definitely can make it better. And I'd carry on for 2 more days.
Okay.
Total waste of time. This is something I've shared with some of my younger colleagues, where they are also driven to go. And I said, but hang on a minute, you told me that the singer said he loved the mix. So
why
stop.
are you playing around with it?
So why are you playing around with it?
Yeah.
Stop now.
Yeah.
Because it's not for you to say. There's you have to put a lot of ego aside in great group work anyway. I don't think this is limited to music, probably.
Well, probably art in general.
Probably,
really.
yeah. It could be.
Whether you're making a film.
It could be probably in many team, in football even.
Sure,
you know. Of course, talented people have egos, but sometimes you have to put your ego aside and say, it's better for me to pass the ball to my colleague
than to try and take
it myself.
Yeah.
You know, so ego generally gets in the way. But, you know, when you're 20 and full of testosterone, then it's hard to have that perspective.
And God knows what else. It's not just testosterone we're full of at 20. How did you get involved with Mute?
I helped John Fox build the garden studio, as you mentioned in your intro, which is round the corner from here. Now closed down, of course. Basically, I was engineering for John quite a lot. I met John in the 8-track, and he got a bit of money together, and he wanted to build a studio, and I was his engineer, so I kind of advised on the gear. I mean, I didn't really know anything about it, but like looking back,
what you had? Do you remember?
I do remember. We bought an AMEC 2520, I think.
Oh wow!
And MCI JH24, and it was the concept was a. This is quite funny actually for the nerds. The concept was it was marketed as like Transformers were marketed as bad in this period in the 80s.
Okay.
So the thing we built was a Transformerless studio, which is really funny now because now you can't wait to put all the audio through like 12 Transformers to make it sound fat.
Yeah, completely. Yeah,
but it doesn't matter. We built John invested and I helped put together a bunch of gear. So what we got basically is a cool artistic electronic musician who's built his own studio. So Mute's working out of Blackwing a lot.
That's right, yes.
They got the difficult third album coming up for Depeche Mode. They are looking for another studio to work in. Just for, not that they fell out with Eric and John, but they just wanted a change. They felt they needed some kind of change. They didn't know what.
Which album was that? Was that Construction Time again?
It was, yeah. So they came to John's studio. They thought, they heard about, there was obviously pre-internet. They'd heard about John's studio. Thought, that could be cool. And it wasn't like a rock and roll studio. It was like minimal and electronic. We loved electronics, so it kind of fitted. So they came to the studio. John Fox said to me, this band Depeche Mode are coming down the studio to check it out. It'd be a good session for you to do. Then I said, I'm not doing that, John. They're on the radio. I just didn't seem right. I was into weird jazz and reggae, and I was doing I was recording a systems group called The Lost Jockey. It wasn't really my music, I thought.
You thought? Okay.
So I said no.
Yeah.
And they came down and they checked the studio out with another engineer, and they liked the studio vibe, but they didn't like the engineer. Luckily for me, because it turned into a lifelong friendship, particularly with the record company boss, Daniel. It's one of my dear friends and mentors, I suppose, but now much more of a colleague and friend. And so John came back to me again as my mentor again, and said, "Look, Gareth, they like the studio, but they didn't like the engineer that I got." He said, "Go over there and meet him." Basically wagging his finger at me. Seemed like a lot. He was a lot more experienced than me, and seemed like a lot older when I was in my 20s. He's probably only about 4 years older or 5 years older or something. But at that time, he seemed like massively experienced. He'd made like 4 albums or something, So anyway, so I went over to Kensington Garden Square, I think it was then, and I met the band and Daniel, and of course they were like nice, normal, weird people. And I was like, cool.
Fit.
That's a kind of seemed like a good fit. Yeah. So they luckily, I suppose we were kind of interviewing each other, really. I didn't, not really. I wasn't, I just thought, okay, I'll go over there and met him. And we took it from there.
Would you say that that's kind of a very definitive moment for you?
Yeah, so it's like sliding doors, isn't it? Like
Right.
that, you know, it's like you got on the tube or you didn't get on the, you know.
Yeah.
But sure, that turned into some very long friendships. I met some wonderful people, yourself included, through that single meeting back then.
Thank you.
I mean, we might have met anyway, but you know,
Sure.
still. And I met my wife through that connection. You know, somehow many years later, and so on. So yeah, very important.
Pretty important finger wagging from your
John.
boss.
Yeah, thanks, John. Well, I think I like this story because that's why it's so awesome, isn't it? Because actually, I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was incredibly fortunate to work with such a creative bunch of people, and who had massive, success due to the wonderful songwriting and the awesome marketing and everything they did. I was obviously a small part of that. That was amazing. But beyond that, the creative relationships and the learning the curve that I went through was. It's really funny how you say this is why judgment is not helpful. As little apes. Yes. We always judge. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it good? Is it bad? Yeah. You can't fucking tell if it's good or bad until afterwards.
And in the studio, if you're trying to be creative, judgment actually can be the killer in some ways.
I agree with that, Kevin, very much. One of the things that the Spiritual Friendship Project that is with my friend Nick Hook in Brooklyn, we're doing our own music, which has been a wonderful journey and growth experience for both of us. One of the early things that we hit on with that record was no judgment. Wow. So that, of course, we when we're creating stuff. So because
when you're writing,
I suppose.
When you're writing, there's no dismissing anything.
No, everything. You're open to everything.
There.
Everything. If you're in the room with someone, all ideas get tried.
Yeah,
and it's very easy to say. And it's so important, I feel, when you're collaborating as a creative team, to not shut each other down.
So then you started with Depeche Mode, and you had Mute and Them had great success.
Yeah.
And then you followed that up by working with Vince Clarke and Erasure. And you were doing something very unique back then when you were with your work with Andy, I feel, because you were primarily responsible for recording Andy. He would use you and only you, as far as I can remember, to record his vocals, which nowadays there are vocal engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you were one of the first people to do that.
That came about, I met Vince and Andy through Demanda Gallas, actually. She was kind enough to mention to Andy that she felt that I had some understanding of recording voice. And really, I'm not even sure it was about the actual recording. I feel it was about giving the vocalists the space to express themselves. It always seemed a bit odd when I started recording that we'd spend, like, if we had a day to record a track, say we had a 14-hour day to record a track back in the 8-track, we'd spend like 12 and a half hours on the band, and then the vocalist would get like 20 minutes to do the vocal. That always seemed a bit...
Which is very strange,
that just seemed a bit odd to me, because obviously as a listener, I remembered, as a young... Before I understood how records were made, or before I even worked out how songs were constructed, I have this... I can feel a memory somewhere about this thing where vocal and a bunch of noise behind it. So it's like a 50-50 thing, So it seemed pretty obvious to me that really it's probably worth spending half the time on the vocals.
You then started the mixing in the box revolution, because you were mixing in the box way before anyone I knew. When did that start? I
think that started... Well, actually, partly just for the sheer bloody-mindedness of it. I thought... I realised quite early on... I remember having a few plugins on an early laptop and thinking, hang on a minute, basically, this is like Hansa Mix Room that I can carry around under my arm. I mean, it probably wasn't, as we all know... everyone of my age knows anyway, in the early days, it wasn't that good.
Yeah.
But now, obviously, it's incredible. Yeah. But in the early days, it wasn't that good. But still, I had this idea. I thought, oh, wait a minute. I got 2 space echoes. I got 3 reverbs. I got 4 compressors, and suddenly it seemed like I'd almost got the whole outboard rack of the Hansa mix room in my laptop. So I thought I'd try and do some work like that.
Right.
And there was probably a budget-driven thing as well at some stage.
Okay.
I probably got offered to do something, but when I didn't have a studio to mix in, and there was no budget really, and someone said, "Can you help?" And I thought, right, I'll try it on my laptop.
Okay.
In the same way that I've tried doing a bit of work on the iPad for same vibe, where I've gone up. I've been on holiday in Greece. I thought, okay, I'll do this remix on the iPad.
Interesting.
And just for the sheer fun of it, really, I suppose, just mucking about.
I think that is quite fair to say that you were one of the very first people mixing solely in the digital domain.
So I was very interested in computers all the way down.
Yeah.
So that when, and actually back to Erasure for a moment, because I was lucky enough to make a bit of royalties off with Vince and Andy, I invested most of that money in the early digital computing Macs. I had an SE30 with a DigiDesign sound card, and then a 4-channel sound card in my Mac 2 FX, whatever it was. This is all super vintage Macs, right?
Yeah,
they cost a lot of money.
Yes, they did. Thousands and thousands.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
But it was super fun, and it was a great learning curve, and now it doesn't really matter. But I had a instinct that, because there were a number of ways it might go. There was a standalone system called Radar. There was a standalone digital recorder, was quite good, and I never was that interested in that. The idea of having here a Studio Vision. There's CDs on the wall there still for the original Studio Vision where it says Deluxe CD.
Oh yeah.
The idea that you could have audio in the sequencer, I just thought was genius. Obviously, because sequencers are cool.
Yeah, because we were quite lucky. We grew up in that evolution. We were alive when that evolution took place.
Yeah.
And yeah, it had its moments. I mean, the computer would fall over on a regular basis.
Sure, it's super challenging.
First of all, it was 4 tracks of audio. Then it was 8 tracks. Originally, it was stereo, wasn't it? Stereo editing rather than anything else.
Yeah.
With sound tools, and then it eventually made its way into Logic and Cubase audio and Logic audio.
Yeah, and the first one was Studio Vision. Which addressed which was also a Californian company, I think, and it addressed. There was a great software sequencer called Vision, really sadly defunct now. They worked out a way to talk to that stereo card that we used for sound tools, so that it appeared in the sequencer, and that was kind of
revolutionary,
mind blowing.
Yeah, it's revolutionary.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's all a bit retro now because it seems everyone's used to like 300 tracks on their laptop. What I was getting at was that because I was even when I went to college, which was long before I ever worked in a recording studio, I was very interested in computing.
Right.
And so when all this shit started arriving, I was very excited by it, and I never saw it as a threat to the old way of working. I always just thought it was incredible new horizons. I loved it.
You completely embraced it.
I really loved it.
I remember you turning up at Mute with your Mac and your MIDI keyboard, and we're going, "Oh, what is that?" And you're just going, "Yep, stereo out on the desk."
Yeah.
And we're like, "Really? Oh, that's an easy session." But whereas today, everyone's doing rocking up, as you say, with the laptop. It's another example of your curiosity with recorded sound.
Yeah.
And I find quite inspirational, because you always looking for that. Whereas a lot of people, as you say, are kind of shying away from it. Certainly, well, not now, because if you're in your 20s, you were born into it, and therefore it's not unusual to work from a computer and stuff like that. But even that generation of people are now suddenly going the other way and starting to come into the analog domain, and they're starting to see, actually, analog actually has a place in their sound.
Yeah,
actually
a workflow. It's more about workflow for me, and I've just done the new record, a portrait that I've just done with Yann Teirsen is all analog, 24-track analog mix to quarter-inch, analog mastering, no digital pre-delay in the lathe, all done totally analog to vinyl. He pushed by him really. is a great friend, and I've made a number of records with Yann now.
Yes.
And I was very keen
yeah.
to support this voyage.
What did that feel like going
I think
back
it's
to
over
that?
25 years since I've made a complete record on analog top to bottom.
What did that feel like?
Great, because
Really?
and sound is awesome, but more the workflow. This thing that because we worked with a well-rehearsed band. The band had done like 50 gigs before we even went in the studio. So it was like working in the 60s, where in the old days, back in the day, apparently, before I was born, bands would go on the road with the material, rehearse it up, then go in the studio and record it. And that's how this one happened. So we set up, and I'm pushing it because I want to do the vocals live as well. They're thinking and my vocals will be largely overdubbed, I think, when we go into the process. But it turns out that they could do the vocals live as well. So for a band, it's an incredible experience. You roll the tape, immediately the bar goes up because they want to come in and play back the tape and hear something amazing because of the way that it's done. Whereas with Pro Tools,
with digital recording,
we can easily fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a bit out of tune there. No worries, we can melodyne that. Okay, it's out of time. We'll time stretch. We'll beat detective that.
Yeah.
And so on. Everyone knows that you can fix anything.
Yeah.
But the workflow of going on to and the track limitation, of course, is fantastic because you might have 8 mics on the piano, but you're only putting the piano on 2 tracks.
That's right, you're mixing down. I was listening to Steve Albini talk about drum recording, and he uses 6 channels. He'll mix down his toms, and then even on his overhead track, on the multi-track,
there'll be room.
It's got ambience and overhead mixed in.
Yeah.
And that was like, that's the old school days. And he likes to commit to that.
Yeah.
He likes that. I mean, obviously, he knows what he's looking for in his studio.
The man's a genius anyway.
Yes, exactly, in terms of recording.
But it's the commitment that makes him a genius as well.
Yes.
And I'd work like that with buses. When I'm submixing, I try to have the drums come out kick snare, toms, and then overheads plus a room bus. So by the time it's all routed down, basically I've got 6 faders on my Behringer controller here, kick snare, toms, and rest of it, room plus overheads, because it's partly because I come from that tradition, but because it's handleable, man. I can't handle a mix with 45 drum tracks. I don't know where to start. I've got to like everyone. I've got to submix it down.
So that manage it.
There we go. Okay, 6 I can handle. Okay.
Are you using an analog front end in here?
Yeah, I got 14 input Fat Bastard. Which I like, and so I'm using 14 inputs like that, and then I've got Clariphonic that I use on the output of the Bastard as a bus EQ, just like a nice treble, like my cheap version of a Massenburg. I'm not paying for the lower frequencies. It's only treble boost, so that's amazing equalizer. I like it a lot, and then I've got a few bits and pieces that I use on hardware inserts, and then I commit to. They might be like a minute. It might be running for a while, and I do use the modular quite a lot. I've got Bucket Brigade delays and spring reverbs and Echophon here and Magneto, all these like super cool delay processors.
Yeah, I can see a lot of that in here actually.
So that kind of runs. Again, it all gets committed. If
you record it back in.
Of course. Yes. Okay. Mainly on a lead vocal, I might build a special effect.
I noticed on the Leisure Society album, the vocals on there are unbelievable. I mean, the singer's obviously a fantastic singer.
Yeah, they delivered great. They did deliver great vocals. Yeah. And that's an example actually where I very much enjoyed, and it's always a bit of a gamble at first, because before you start working with people, you build an effect, and it's another thing where you have to not judge, otherwise you'll never commit, and also then you have to not be ego bound because you have to be ready for them to say, I don't like that. So with the combination of parallel drive from the Big Trees,
that's made by Steve, isn't it?
Yeah,
Steve, who used to work at Mute.
Yeah.
Who works at Mute.
Yeah, he's a lovely,
very
guy,
very creative,
great
guy.
Genius, and that's a real boutique company, isn't it?
Yeah.
What are they called? Audio Kitchen.
Audio Kitchen. Yeah, that's his own company. He worked with Mutronics, didn't he?
Yeah, Mutator they made, didn't they?
He did help make the Mutator.
because again, the vocal, as we know, the vocal's so important.
Yeah.
And sometimes I will build outboard effects, and even sometimes I use the Tweaker's outboard compression.
I mean, I noticed on that Leisure Society album, I mean, the vocal effects are unbelievable. Sometimes it's like really subtle delays. Would that be all coming
Some
from
of
here?
it could be, yeah.
And again, spring reverbs, and maybe through the course of a song, you would have 2 or 3 vocal effects.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would be quite dry,
Yeah.
and then other times it would be very atmospheric.
Well, when they sing loud, I put more effects on.
Really? That simple?
Well, yeah, in the choruses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you going to mix it the way you've mixed every track you've mixed ever in your
No,
life?
man, I'm going to listen to the rough mix.
Okay.
Like always,
Right.
and that's again something that it took me about 20 years to
20 years to learn.
Yeah, because
But don't forget the rough mixes before were made on a cassette.
they weren't, but still they were very important. And I think I used to think, the rough mix is irrelevant because they've come to me to mix it, and now of course the rough mix is sacred. So,
Right, okay.
I've always got the rough mix in the rig,
Yeah.
and it's always on a button where I can refer to. There's always something brilliant on the rough mix that I've missed.
Yeah.
Very rough mix led. I just mixed a lovely record, a single track for a band from Norway called Major Parkinson. It's
Okay.
a beautiful song, and for some stupid reason, I got it into my head that the vocal sounded awesome dry, and it did sound awesome dry to me,
Right.
but that didn't wash with the band. And of course, it wasn't like that on the rough mix, and that was a little example where actually I wasted my own time, and I fell in love with something that was not appropriate.
Because nowadays that rough mix, we say it's rough, but actually sometimes it could be
Might have been-
75% of the song,
Yeah,
if
man,
not more.
and it could have been there for 9 months.
Yeah.
It could have been there for a
Yeah.
long time. I mean, there's no point in talking about how we used to work,
No.
but because it's built in a DAW, the rough mix is a huge part of
Yeah.
the Apparat record LP5.
Yes.
The rough mixes on that Sasha did with his producer Phil, they were incredible. It was 1 or 2 people who've been kind enough to say how amazing the Apparat record sounds, but I mean, man, it sounded amazing when it arrived.
Do you spend a lot of time outside of the studio listening to music?
Yeah, I was an early adopter of the Sony Walkman. Actually, I bought one in San Francisco before they were available in Europe.
Right.
So headphones.
Okay.
So yeah, I got and I just I'm still using Sony.
You've got your Dr. Dre
just bought some-
Beats.
Yeah, but I got they're good for the gym. But I got some other these awesome little Sony these new little Sony earbuds. I mean, it's only Bluetooth, but they're amazing. So
Right,
yes,
okay.
I listen. I love listening to vinyl at home as well.
Right, okay,
I listen to the radio a lot.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Radio 3 fan. Classical
Okay, yeah.
music was my first love because my dad's record collection was
Right,
classical.
of course.
I've inherited his vinyl, actually. I've got it all at home. And that is quite wonderful to play. If I play, because my dad didn't have a lot of money, so he only had 1 recording of each piece. He wasn't like a collector who'd have 20 recordings of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony.
Right.
But when I play my dad's old vinyl I just rediscovered, like when he passed, when my mum died, actually, we closed the house down, and I took the vinyl and I played some of the early. I thought, that is somehow the definitive version of that piece. So yeah, big Radio 3 fan. It's very often on in our house. In the morning, I'll put Radio 3 on. Sometimes in the evening as well. Vinyl, I still love. Since I've discovered Tidal, which high quality streaming,
Yeah.
I'm not buying so much vinyl, I'm ashamed to say. In the early days of streaming, when I was only listening to Spotify with its very compressed feed,
Yeah.
and Apple Music, again, very compressed feed, I was like thinking, if I liked it, I'd go and buy the vinyl and enjoy the real thing.
Okay.
But now I do that a lot less. If my friend makes a piece of vinyl, then I'll buy it as a support and to have for love.
Yeah.
But the Tidal, especially that the quality is extremely good.
I've actually never listened to Tidal.
Well, they've even gone to master now, so you can get 96K stuff if you deliver 96K and tick the right box.
Yeah.
Mute is still struggling to do that. I've asked Joff at Mute if he can please find the box, because I deliver this work in 96K, and I'd like to have it come back from Tidal at 96K.
Do you record at 96K now?
It depends on the track count. The Spiritual Friendship, my own stuff, that is, I know the track count is limited, is 96. I'm not saying that I'm going to pick what is the 320 MP3 and what is the 96K, Kevin. I'm not.
No.
I'm listening to the music. Like, I'm not a great technician, I don't think. So I'm not trying to pretend that I find the one awesome and the other completely crap.
Yeah.
But I have noticed a little bit, I feel, archiving analog, or any time the stuff goes analog, if you can bring it back in 96K, I think that's respectful for the future.
Sure.
So like a high quality archive, multi-track. I'm not going to archive that at 44, because it just seems rude. And also in working 96K, there's something about the intimacy and the way the high end I can screw tops on. I don't know. There's something I kind of prefer about it.
Yeah, I agree. 96K for me does sound better than 48.
If I had the computing power, then I would do, and I was doing big projects, I'd do everything at 96K just for future proofing, and because it feels a bit more like analog to me. When I'm working at 96K, I just think, you know what, I'm not that gutted that it's not on tape. I think it's actually, there's lots of detail, there's lots of depth.
Yeah. And there's restriction, like you say. In Pro Tools, 96. There's only 96 tracks.
Well, see, that's
Pro Tools.
only 96 tracks. How can we make a record with 96 tracks?
Well, 96 voices. I think 96 voices. So you can have 128 tracks, but you can only play 96 at once. Which again, criminal.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to add one thing. A colleague of mine we spoke about this. Has had some projects delivered to him 96K that he couldn't play on his rig. And he's done several like this now. He's converted them to 44.1 and mixed, and no one's ever noticed as well. That's the other side of the coin. So he's done the mixes. The mixes have been signed off on, and no one's ever said. So it's a subtle thing, right? I like it anyway. If I can do it, I like it. And I didn't when it first came out. And it's all to do with prejudice. When my computer couldn't run 96K, I just thought, what a waste of time.
You thought, I'm not going to bother with that.
No, it's pointless. I thought, no, it's all. But since my computing power's expanded a bit and some track counts have gone down, then actually I'm thinking, that's nice. I'm on my little Mojo Chord Mojo D2A converter. That's my reference converter for home. Plugs into the phone and shit. I get a green light when it's 96K.
So as long as your mixes are green, you're happy.
I like to see the green light come on.
What's 48? What's 44.1? Oh no, definitely green every time. When people want to come into the industry, what do you think? What's your thoughts on education? And when I say education, what I mean is universities and colleges who are teaching large numbers of people to use studio equipment. Do you think that's a help or a hindrance to the students themselves?
I think it depends on the student, actually. There's an assistant or two here who came through that course, and they were great,
right? Really
great. On the other hand, we've all worked with people who come out of
other colleges.
And in any college, they come and they think they know everything, and they haven't even made a record yet. I love it when you get a email from a young person who's still perhaps at college, and in the SIG it says producer. And then you think, have you even produced one record? Even one? And the other thing, of course, that happens is, a lot of these colleges are wonderfully well equipped with great teachers and great equipment. And I have gone and lectured myself, and I've been a part of the MPG accreditation for the different colleges as well.
Okay.
Although that's not something I'm doing now. So they've been working, say, on massive, great SSL dualities and big Neve consoles and everything, and then they come to work with, say, me, and actually they're in my little shed on a laptop. Were you at when Mute went into EMI? Were you in that phase? Yes. I mixed records in a cupboard at EMI. I mixed a bunch of great records essentially in a cupboard, which is not very glamorous if you're a student And you have to have the right kind of headspace to make that adjustment and go, oh, actually, this is the real world.
Yeah.
The real world out here. There's not always a budget to be in Abbey Road or Ayr.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's clearly a good business model. For the right student, it can be a great help.
Sure.
Because especially as the number of assistant placements that have gone down. You know, you're now, when I met you, you introduced me to some great assistants who became great engineers and assistants for me.
Who I would have, if I remember, most of those would have come from a university at some point.
Because
at that time,
it's just starting. Because if that's on their CV, you think, well, at least they've been serious enough to study for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. But even more now, it's very hard to get a placement as an assistant without some kind of background. I think all the new assistants here have been through some kind of college.
Yeah.
Whereas in the 70s and 80s, at 16 you would apply to a studio and you'd become a runner, and you know the classic tea person, toilet cleaner, runner, whatever, anything,
sandwich fetcher,
anything,
Yeah.
and you'd come up that way. So it is an experience. And another thing about it is, I mean, it's useful to study anything. I think it helps. You know, you could go to college and study Latin, man. Seems stupid to say. That promotes new ways of thinking. For instance, I went to college, I studied science. It's nothing to do with what I do now. I did have a very creative, successful and passionate relationship with the computer department. Yeah. But this was punch cards and printouts on great big Fortran machines, you know. It's nothing to do with the computers that I use now. So the courses are valuable as long as we realise there aren't the jobs to go with the courses, and as long as we realise that the industry is not... there's a difference between the college and the industry.
Yeah.
You know. When I started working in little studios, it was basically punk. So I wasn't a punk, actually. I was more like a psychedelic hippie guy. But the ethos of punk, this do-it-yourself thing, was really inspiring for me. So, because there was no question that you couldn't just do it. That was one of the things that I took from punk. You just have to step up and do it. And the other thing I wanted to add, actually, was our friend Bruce Gilbert from Wire has a wonderful phrase, beginner's luck. He has noticed over a very long, super creative career that if he comes to something that he doesn't know and interfaces with it, cool shit happens. Particularly at the beginting.
That first 10 minutes or 1 hour.
Or that first day with the new pedal or something. When you don't really know what's happening. And I think that's wonderful. And he still... I bumped into him recently, and he spoke about that in the context of some new device he'd recently purchased. Amazing. Not an expensive device. I can't remember what it was even, but he was like, I said, I really believe in this beginner's luck thing. You know, as I interface with it, isn't it good? You know,
that's a great way to describe it. Actually, that innocence almost, that you don't know what you're doing,
and you don't know how it's supposed to work, and yet you can. But, of course, you have to be able to get sound through it. And that's one of the things I remember. As you said, now it's pretty easy with an audio interface. You just basically put the track on input and sound comes out of the speaker. Yeah. But it was a huge achievement for me in my early days in the BBC.
For all of us.
In the BBC. I'm in a studio, and to get a mic to come out the speaker on your own.
It was a process.
Whoa, man. Yeah. I remember being in night sessions on in the studio, like... flummoxed, puzzled, challenged. Well, something that simple is so funny.
Well, it was something allegedly that simple, but it wasn't actually. If you think about it, do you have any particular things that you've always done, or things that maybe you've done but changed over the years to give you the Gareth Jones sound?
The first thing that comes to mind is I've totally built back into my mixing flow how I used to do it at the beginning. So I try and build a mix in a day and get it to the point where I can record it and take it home.
How long does it take you to do a mix, roughly?
Well, I try to get it. It depends. It's so much about the prep, isn't it? Okay. If you get 300 tracks and it's chaos, you have to do some prep time. Yeah. Or if you're lucky, you might be able to hire an assistant to do the prep for you.
Yeah.
But I try and get a mix done. I try and get it up to a stage where everything's in and sounding all right. Yeah. And then as soon as I get it to that point, I record it, I bounce it, whatever, print it actually, and then I go home. and then I play it in the morning and make some notes.
Okay.
So, which is what I used to do at the very beginning. So, in other words, once I've got it to that point where the whole song is in, which in an ideal world has happened in a day's work, then I don't fuck with it any longer. I take a break.
You step back from it.
I step back. I go home. I do something else.
Yeah.
I wake up in the morning. I write my journal. I have a cup of tea, and I sit down and I play the mix back on my little stereo at home, and I make some notes, and then I come back in because I find that hugely more time effective. I used to get everything in, and then I would stay up till 6 a.m, still mucking about.
Yeah.
But for me, that's not time effective. As soon as everything's in, and including the backing vocals, the whole song,
the whole thing,
where I could actually play it to the band. I don't play it to the band at that stage, but where actually the whole song is in. Then as soon as I got that, and I think, oh, well, that's pretty good. Then I'm almost racing against a deadline to get that done by 10 o'clock, say, or whenever I'm leaving, or whatever it is.
Sure.
You know, to get out, get on the tube, chill out, go home, get a bit of supper, and then play it. And because I find that very time effective. The perspective, because of course the longer you work on a mix, the harder it is to maintain perspective.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
Some of the great mix engineers around that I've seen working around in different studios, it's almost like they always seem to be in having a cup of tea or on the pool table. Those perspectives are valuable, I think, and I try and obviously, you know. It's all the things that everyone says, you know. Obviously, I don't go on the web. I don't answer emails. I don't have the phone on.
Yeah.
I try and do it like a 3-hour session in the old musicians' union rule. If I can get 3 hours focus on something, I can get a lot done.
Yeah,
you know.
sure.
So if I can do 3-hour focus sessions in a day and get the mix to a point where I can actually say, well, everything's in, and it stops me pissing about, to be honest. I think, well, hang on a minute, it's 9:30. I've only got an hour. I need to get those bloody backing vocals in right now, and the string section. Come on. And then I push to do that. I find that very helpful.
Okay. Do you have a favourite piece of gear that you're always using, apart from maybe
Barefoots.
The Barefoots. Yeah, you love them,
Yeah.
They're great sounding.
The other thing that's changed my monitoring vibe is SonarWorks. When Trinov came out, I was very suspicious of the DSP, the extra DSP. I've learnt to love the Trinov now because
Can you explain what that is to some people?
Well, what it is it's the measurement microphones that calibrate the monitors.
So it's room correction?
It's room correction.
Okay.
It's room monitor interface correction.
Okay.
So, for instance, in this room, even though I know this room really well, I was constantly having feedback from clients that stuff was a bit bassy. And then a friend of mine, James, actually, it was James Aparicio, our mutual friend, who turned me on to SonarWorks, which is a cheap measurement mic and a bit of software that you put on the output, and it takes you about 20 minutes to ping the room.
Yeah.
And it turned out around about 100 hertz, I had quite a big suck at dip in this room. So, and obviously I like bass. So even though I know the room and I was referencing other pieces of music, I was still putting too much bass on the tracks. So a good monitor system is invaluable, isn't it?
Can you suggest any things to avoid in the record-making process or the mix process or the production process that you can suggest to people?
Don't listen to the critic. Don't listen to your own critic. Don't be shut down by your own critic.
That little voice.
I think that's so important. You know, let's face it, I am not Quincy Jones. I am not Glyn Johns. I am not, there's millions. I am not Kraftwerk. There are millions of great, awesome studio workers that I'm not. So if I've got this little voice on my shoulder telling me all the time how shit I am compared to other people, I'm never going to do anything. So I feel it's really important to shut your own personal critic down. And as we said earlier, to be and similarly, don't shut anyone else down in the room.
Yeah.
Try everything. Yeah. If you and I decide to make a record together, it's because we love each other and we trust each other. Yeah. And any idea that either of us throw into the room, no matter how absurd, is worth trying. For a long time, we're all working in the studio and we're like a team and we're mates and we're working on we feel very close and we constructed this thing, whatever it is. And then the record company comes down, right, with their opinions. And it's like, oh no, what? So, and for a long time, I found it very frustrating that people seemingly outside the process would come in with their opinions about what we were doing. And for fuck's sake, what do they know about it? And I've seen a lot of my younger friends and colleagues struggle with this. And now what I say is, hang on a minute, you and me put 10 grand into making a record, right? Yeah. We give it to an engineer and a band to go away and make the record. And then they come back to us, and what they play us, we don't like. There's something wrong with it. And we put our own money, we put 5 grand in each, imagine.
Yeah.
I say, what would you do? Obviously, you'd go down the studio and sort it out. That's flipping it round, right?
That comes back to your no idea is a bad idea.
Well, also it comes back around to the client's always right.
The client's always right, yes. I mean, funny enough, I was saying that at a lecture, you've got gates that you have to go through. You've got to get through the artist, the producer, the manager, the record company.
Yeah, the artist's partner.
And then maybe your record will go out into the world.
Yeah.
And you've got to find ways to get through those gates.
Thanks so much for coming by, Kevin. It was great to see you. Great to chat.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, brother.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of MixBus with me, Kevin Paul. Don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and subscribe to the whole series on Podbean or wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to join me for the next episode, and until then, goodbye.